Episode 10, When Wales Lost a Region, The Tale of the Celtic Warriors. After months of speculation, on the 24th of October 2025, the Welsh Rugby Union announced that they'd be cutting the number of men's professional teams from 4 to 3. Let's look back at the last time the Welsh Rugby Union cut a region. The regionalisation of Welsh rugby in the early 2000s came after a decade of poor results at international level and the advent of professionalism across the globe. Despite it taking place over 2 decades ago, it remains one of the most controversial events in Welsh rugby history. At the time of writing of January 2026, the Welsh Rugby Union is preparing to cut one of these regions, following a run of poor results and financial constraints. However, this is not the first time that the Welsh Rugby Union has cut a region. This article looks at the short history of the Celtic Warriors and asks the question, has the WRU learned anything from the tale of the Warriors? On April Fool's Day 2003, the Welsh Rugby Union's Chief Executive Officer David Moffat announced that after significant consultation and almost monthly emergency general meetings, rugby in Wales would be undergoing a process known as regionalisation. Each region would represent a large geographic area of Wales, rather than an individual town or even village. This was based on the New Zealand professional model, rather than the club-based model that England and France were using. There would be 5 new regions, each featuring a professional men's team and eventually its own development network. The 5 new professional teams would play in the Celtic League and the European Championship, replacing the 9 previous Welsh clubs who played in those competitions. The extended talks prior to the announcement of the 5 regions concerned the number of regions along with the makeup of the regions themselves. Whilst the original idea was for club mergers, the reality was in fact that 2 of the regions comprised of one sole team, whilst the other 3 were amalgamations. The New Llanelli side would play at Stradey Park, whilst the Cardiff side would play at the Arms Park. The other 3 regions, however, were required to create new identities as well as merge boards, finances and players. Neath and Swansea, Newport and Ebbw Vale, and Bridgend and Pontypridd were all set to merge to create the final 3 regions. Bridgend and Pontypridd were both informed clubs during the early 2000s, with Bridgend winning the 2003 Welsh Premiership title and Pontypridd usually obtaining a top 5 league finish during that era. Both teams featured a plethora of Welsh internationals, including but not limited to Neil Jenkins and Gareth Jenkins at Pontypridd, and Gareth Thomas and Ryan Jones at Bridgend. Former Pontypridd coach Lynn Howes, along with his assistant and former Bridgend coach Alan Lewis, were able to put together an extremely strong squad. However, the relatively stable coaching partnership of Howes and Lewis and the strong squad would prove to be one of the only highlights of the Warriors' tenure. Combining the 2 clubs to create a region was controversial. Previous plans had involved Bridgend merging with Neath, which they seemed happy enough to do. However, Pontypridd fans bristled at the prospect of merging with Cardiff, with one fan going as far as to say he would close the curtains if a Pontypridd-Cardiff region played in his garden. Forging an identity that comprised of both the representation of Valleys rugby as well as the legacy of Bridgend proved tricky. After launching without a name, the original name RCT Ravens was mooted by the WRU for being branded as the Rhondda Valley and for featuring Bridgend's nickname, the Ravens. After a brief flirtation with the name Celtic Crusaders, the neutral Celtic Warriors name was eventually chosen. Along with the tricky identity issue, behind the scenes there was a power battle brewing between the 2 sides. As Lynn Howes explains in his autobiography Despite the Knockbacks, the primary sponsor of Pontypridd had been the hire purchase company Buyers You View. The company were a slightly different type of sponsor to the Peter Thomas model at Cardiff, or even the Leighton Samuel model at Bridgend. Instead of pumping money directly into the club, the company had employed numerous players and provided goods such as cars. Unfortunately, in the world of professional rugby, this was not enough to keep a club afloat, let alone one of the new Welsh regions. Whilst Bridgend and Pontypridd had originally both owned equal shares in the Celtic Warriors, following financial difficulties, Pontypridd were forced to sell their shares in the team for £100,000. Bridgend owner Leighton Samuel had always been an interesting character. Loud and brash with little to no filter, Samuel frequently caused issues during the Warriors' tenure. For example, announcing that it was likely the 5 regions would become 4 within 2 to 3 years due to financial difficulties prior to the 2003-04 season. It was clear to see that Samuel was not going to be easy to work with from the get-go. Samuel yo-yoed in and out of the region, consistently threatening to and announcing that he was leaving the club or that he was cutting funding. It is clear, however, that what Samuel really longed for was complete control of the region. Whilst it had originally been agreed that the games would be split between Pontypridd Sardis Road and Bridgend Brewery Fields, Samuel made it known that after the team's pre-season fixture at Sardis Road against Bath that he was not happy with the stadium. Previous to that, Chief Executive Gareth Thomas resigned from his position as he stated that his working relationship with Samuel was unworkable. With Samuel in control as Chief Executive and holding 50% of the shares in the region, it was not surprising that when Pontypridd were facing debts of £700,000, he offered to pay off the debts in exchange for Pontypridd's share in the Celtic Warriors. This original offer was rejected by the WRU. However, Samuel would go on to buy Pontypridd out for the much lower price of £100,000. Surprisingly, though, Samuel would not keep the shares. Instead, he gave them, willingly and free of charge, to the Welsh Rugby Union. Whilst the WRU had rejected the original share sale, as they did not want one person to have full control of a region, Samuel's gift to give Pontypridd's share of the Warriors to the WRU is one of the most baffling aspects of the Warriors saga. While Samuel likely knew that he couldn't keep the Warriors afloat financially on his own, having invested reportedly close to £1 million in the region and much more in Bridgend RFC itself, buying the shares just to give them away to the governing body, which probably would have been forced to step in if Pontypridd had gone under, seems odd. Samuel had never truly been in control of the region's spending. The Warriors had a far inflated wage bill, as Samuel had offered out contracts far larger than the market rate. The combined total for players' wages was £200,000 per month, according to Howells, with the Welsh Rugby Union providing £137,500 per month. The Warriors were required to not only pay roughly a third of the players' wages themselves, but also all of the other club expenses. Samuel's business plan rested on the idea that the Warriors would make up the deficit through money spent at the games. With only 2,500 people attending the games on average, this was not coming to pass, and also gave the Warriors the unfortunate title of the lowest attended region in regional rugby. Following the WRU's acquisition of shares in November 2003, the Brewery Fields became the region's primary home. While Samuel had originally wanted all games to be played in Bridgend, the move allowed Samuel more control as he owned the stadium, but also alienated Pontypridd fans. With Samuel in primary control and the team based in Bridgend, the financial woes continued, with Howells estimating that the region was losing roughly £50,000 per month. There is a feeling that with Leighton Samuel running the show, then we could either fold or win the Heineken Cup. Lynn Howells, Celtic Warriors head coach, 2012. Gareth Thomas described the Celtic Warriors as a sinking ship when he resigned in September 2003, and by April 2004, Leighton Samuel was much like the most negative portrayals of Titanic captain Edward Smith. In an attempt to save himself, in April, Samuel announced publicly that he was not only resigning from his position at the Celtic Warriors, but that he would also stop all financial backing the following month. Whilst this was not the first time that Samuel had resigned or announced that he was withdrawing funding, with the WRU now holding equal stakes in the region, his threats were taken seriously. I would have thought it would have been good to at least have had a discussion with them. I'm extremely disappointed that such a serious and significant statement, with obvious far-reaching consequences, was made to the media before it was discussed at board level. David Moffat, WRU CEO, 2004. It is possible that had the union been made aware prior to the announcement, that the outcome may have been different. It is also possible that the union expected Moffat to withdraw funding. Reportedly, the Welsh Rugby Union had sent a letter to all 5 regions regarding an upcoming audit, which perhaps led to Samuel's announcement. The letters regarding finances were prompted by the publicly known financial concerns of the Newport Gwent Dragons, and the WRU's inkling that others may also be struggling. Howells postulates that with the Dragons' financial benefactor having significantly deeper pockets than the Warriors, and the other 3 being financially stable at the time, Samuel was prompted to not only announce the withdrawal of funding, but to also contact the WRU to seek a way out. A fortnight in May 2004 would change the makeup of Welsh rugby permanently. Various stories have come out from this period, including rather unbelievable tales from Leighton Samuel himself. The facts, however, are as follows. Leighton Samuel sold Bridgend's shares in the Celtic Warriors. The final agreement was made 2 days prior to the Warriors' final game of the season out in Galway. The Welsh Rugby Union called the Warriors to the Vale the following Monday, and finally, the Celtic Warriors were dissolved. Lynn Howells' account of the dissolution of the Warriors is perhaps the most in-depth and most quoted. According to Howes, the team travelled to Galway, and during the post-match celebrations, he received a phone call from coach Richard Webster. Webster, who had returned home early, had got wind of rumours in Wales that Samuel had sold his shares to the WRU. Convinced that once again Samuel was crying wolf, Howes ignored the rumours. The following Monday, staff and coaches were called in for an afternoon meeting at the Vale. Due to start at 4 p.m, the meeting was delayed by lawyers, but finally at 5 p.m, the team were informed that Samuel had sold his shares to the WRU. In meetings and discussions over the following days, it became increasingly obvious that the Warriors were no more and that the Welsh Rugby Union would be disbanding the region. The dissolution of the Warriors was protracted. Some players were picked up by other regions, others went to England or France, and some had their careers ended by the abrupt closure of the region. Additionally, Samuel ended up in a legal battle as he stated that he had entered into a verbal agreement with the WRU, which he said meant that the WRU weren't allowed to close down the region. The remaining 4 regions were also required to pay the WRU £312,500 each so that the union could pay out both Samuel and cover any additional costs such as final wages and outstanding bills. Interestingly, despite the memory of the 2003-2004 season being the advent of the regions and the dissolution of the Celtic Warriors, was arguably the most successful in Welsh regional rugby and kick-started the Golden Age. As Hugh Griffin discusses in his article, the Welsh regions have always been bad, haven't they? The 2003-04 season saw the Scarlets win the Celtic League and all 5 teams come within the top 6. The following year saw the national men's team win a Six Nations Grand Slam and more regional success as the Ospreys won the league. Samuel would go on to resurrect the Warriors as a rugby league side known as the Celtic Crusaders. The team lasted 6 seasons, including 3 in the Super League, before folding in 2011. Samuel himself would continue in business until 2014, when his picture frame business Decor Limited was dissolved. Despite going through administration in 2003, Pontypridd RFC is still playing, currently sat in the Premiership, having won the league 4 times during the 2010s. Today, the club comes under the Cardiff regional system, and whilst professional players have come through the ranks of Pontypridd, support is just as low as expected for the capital city-based side. Bridgend RFC would go on to become the Bridgend Ravens following the withdrawal of support by Leighton Samuel during the Celtic Warriors era. The team are currently a semi-professional side playing in Super Rugby Cymru, having spent much of the past 2 decades in the Welsh Premiership. The area is now covered by the Ospreys region, with Bridgend-based fan Rihanna Lewis stating that the Ospreys have successfully absorbed the area, with games and community events taking place in the town. The region is playing their 25-26 games at the Brewery Fields, whilst construction is underway for their return to St Helens. The demise of the Warriors in the end did not come down to the on-field success of the team, who finished 4th in the league, or the financial losses of the region, as proven by the Dragons in the same year. Rather, it came down to a benefactor who had underestimated the cost of running a truly professional sports team and a governing body who had initially preferred the idea of having 4 teams instead of 5. There are many questions still to be answered when it comes to the Celtic Warriors, with very few of the stories adding up and gaping holes in the logic. For this author, Leighton Samuel buying Pontypridd shares is a gift to the WRU, along with him selling Bridgend shares to the WRU and reportedly expecting a region to stay open. Makes very little sense. There is the possibility that either Leighton Samuel is lying and that both sales were always to result in the closure of the region, or that the WRU pulled a fast one on Samuel and set him up as the fall guy. Both of these speculations, however, are simply based on the incredibly unacademic method of gut feeling. The demise of the Warriors, caused by the loss of a benefactor, somewhat mirrors the plight of Cardiff Rugby in 2025. Following the passing of long-time benefactor Peter Thomas in 2023, the club struggled financially. Now under the control of the Welsh Rugby Union, it could be argued that it was the catalyst for the current predicament of the regions. The Welsh Rugby Union have floated the idea of reducing the number of regions again at various points over the last decade. The 2025-26 season is perhaps the closest that the union has come to doing so, partially due to the fact that the union currently holds a significant amount of power through their ownership of Cardiff Rugby, as well as the poor results of both the men's national team and the regions. With rumours that the Ospreys owners Y11 had put in a bid to purchase the capital city-based region, and that by doing so could see the closure of the Ospreys, it does feel like the current situation is a rewriting of 2004, with few of the lessons learned. Abby Tierney, Dave Redding and Richard Collier-Keywood are building personal legacies in Wales not too dissimilar to that of David Moffat. Redden himself has stated that he's not interested in the history of the teams involved when making decisions. However, it may have been wise for Redding, Tierney and Collier-Keywood to look back at the history of the Celtic Warriors when making their decision. Authors note, the history of the Celtic Warriors is really complex and confusing, as so many of the sources are personal anecdotes which just don't align with one another. Much of my knowledge comes from Cy Williams's Welsh Rugby What Went Wrong and Lindhouse's autobiography Despite the Knockbacks. Even with these sources, the story remains somewhat of a mystery due to certain parties' misuse of the truth and, just autobiographies in general not being a great source. But we roll with it. There's huge gaps in the story, and this is pretty much the most information I could glean. It's very complicated and not a lot of it makes a lot of sense. In unrelated news, I was recently interviewed by Lena Zahara Mohammed for BBC Wales regarding a misogynistic comment made by Lynn Jones on S4C. You can find that piece linked on my website, or if you go to the BBC website and search in Lynn Jones, it'll come up. And because I am the human embodiment of glitter, I also made an appearance on a bonus episode of Saucepans and Sidesteps, as well as an appearance on Scrum of the Earth recently, which you can find on the Wrap YouTube or on the Global Game Line channels on YouTube. If you'd like more regular updates, check out my Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky. You can also catch me podding every Tuesday with Wrap, again on the Wrap channel on YouTube, or just type in Wrap on your podcaster of choice. You're obviously listening to the audio version. If you've made it all the way through, I would very much appreciate if you, whatever the preferred method on your podcasting platform is, whether it's liking, rating, subscribing, commenting, I'd very much appreciate it. If you'd like to see images or references or any such thing, please check out my website. And yeah, bye.